Right, I haven't uploaded this PowerPoint yet because I haven't finished it. There's quite a lot in it, and we won't cover it all today. So we'll do a bit today and probably some next week as well. Okay, so who wants to pray today?
Lord Father, we do thank you to bring us here, also bring the theologians around the world to attend the Pentecostal Forum Dialogue, and we ask you that this dialogue and have these two denominations united together to preach the gospel in condemnation. And Lord, we ask you to bless this dialogue, and through this dialogue, these two denominations can understand each other and work together. Yes, Lord, and also bring the insights to our campus as well. And Lord, we commit our class into your mighty hand, because give us Professor K's wisdom to equip us so we can know better and know deep about your words in Jonah. Thank you, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, what I've done is I've summarized a lot of information from this book, A Guide to Biblical Hebrew Syntax, by Bill Arnold and John Che. And so we're just going to go through and look at the things that you need to be aware of from a grammatical point of view. When we're translating, sometimes it's easy for us to just translate literally and not really think about what's actually happening in the grammar. So, obviously, nouns are an important part of a sentence, and so we're going to look at how nouns function. In Hebrew, there are three distinct ways in which nouns function. Now, in other languages, there are a lot more. Hebrew, in this respect, is really quite simple. Okay, so a noun can be a nominative, which means it's the subject of a sentence, or it can be a genitive, and a genitive usually in English is translated of something. You know, son of David, or house of God. Okay, these are different kinds of genitives, and in Hebrew they're usually expressed by a construct chain. And then the third way in which nouns can function is accusative, which means that they're actually the object of a verb. Okay, and the accusative usually, if it's a definite object, then it's got the sign of the definite direct object marker. Not always, but often. Okay. So there are three ways in which the nominative can act as the subject of the verb. It can be a predicate. Okay, in a sentence where one noun is equated with another noun connected by the verb to be. Okay, so we can say David is the king. David is the nominative, and it's a predicate to the verb, to the noun the king. Okay, and the verb to be is what connects them. Okay, it's a very simple statement. Okay, it can also be a vocative, and the vocative is when a person is actually addressing somebody. So when we say, "Oh Lord," that's the vocative form of the word. Okay, and in Hebrew it doesn't look any different than just the Lord. But we have from the context to decide, is it a vocative? Okay. And then the third one is what we call a nominative absolute. This happens when a noun is separated from the verb it is the subject of by some kind of phrase that is in between them, or a term that is in apposition to the subject. Okay, so Adam says to God, the woman, and then in English we put a comma there, whom you gave me, she gave me fruit from the tree and I ate it. The noun, the woman, is separated from the verb she gave me by this little phrase. Okay? And the noun, the woman, is what we call a nominative absolute. It's separated from the verb, but when we come to the verb we find the verb is feminine singular. So we know that the woman who's mentioned first is the subject of the verb. Okay? And there's a phrase in between them that separates them. Okay? Sometimes in Hebrew the pronoun of the verb is expressed separately in this case, because it says the woman and then who you gave to me is separate, and then it may have he, Hebrew he, and then the verb to make the connection between the woman at the beginning of the sentence and the verb that comes later. Okay, so sometimes the pronoun is separated from the verb, and it's not just for emphasis, it's really to tell us the noun at the beginning of the sentence is the subject of that verb. Okay, so you see the difference between those things. A nominative form, it may be a predicate, where a predicate is something is something. Okay, the predicate is the first word and the other word is describing it. Okay. The vocative is just when we're addressing somebody, O Lord, or O Master, or normally in English we put an O in front of it, but you can just use the word without. And in Hebrew there's no difference. You can't see the difference between a noun that's the subject of a sentence and a noun that is somebody speaking to that person. So the only way to know is whether it's direct speech or not. Okay. And then the nominative absolute is that where the two are disconnected. Okay, so three ways that a noun can be nominative in form in a sentence. Okay, then the second way that a noun works as a genitive is actually much more complicated, because there's a variety of uses of a genitive in Hebrew. The genitive is usually a construct chain. Okay, but there is a whole lot of ways in which we can use a genitive. So it can be possessive, and that's the one we are used to. It's usually expressed in a construct chain, and the absolute is the owner of the construct. So, for example, we say the house of the Lord. That means the house belongs to the Lord, or the son of David. The son belongs to Daid. It's possessive, and that is probably the simplest and the most common use of the genitive in Hebrew, the construct chain. It's the one that we're most used to. Okay, but there are other ways you can do this. I said possessive for this one, but actually a second slightly different use of this genitive is relationship. So when we say the son of David, we're not really using it as the son belongs to David, we're using it as in terms of the son is related to David. Okay, so it marks relationship between the two things in the construct. Okay. The third way is subjective. The genitive is the subject of a verbal idea that is expressed by a construct. Okay. So when we talk about the salvation of Yahweh, Okay. Yahweh is actually the subject of the verbal idea, salvation. Yahweh is the one who saves. Okay. And so the Hebrew terminology will say the salvation of Yahweh if we translated it literally, but Yahweh is the subject of that verbal idea that's in the construct. Okay, now it's still a construct chain. It would say Yeshua Yahweh. It would be a construct chain. Okay, but the genitive expressed by the word Yahweh is the subject of that verbal idea that is in the construct. Okay. It can be objective. Okay, so the genitive is the object of the verbal notion that's expressed by the construct. The fear of Yahweh. The fear is a verbal idea, but it's not the fear belonging to Yahweh. It's Yahweh is the object of the fear. Okay, so it's like the opposite of the subjective one. It's the other way around. Yahweh has become the object of that verbal idea rather than the subject of it. Okay. The next one is the attributive. The genitive refers to a quality or attribute of the construct. So in all of these cases, when I'm talking about the genitive, I'm talking about the absolute in a construct chain. Normally the absolute, we say something of whatever the absolute is. So in this case, the genitive refers to a quality or attribute of the construct. A man of worth. Okay, a man who is worthy is what that phrase means. Okay, it's a quality of the person. Okay, we could say the normal way that we, if we translate literally from Hebrew into English, the phrase the mountain of His holiness is how it would be expressed in Hebrew, but in English we would say His holy mountain. The holiness is an attribute of Him. Okay, and an attribute of therefore of His mountain. Okay, so sometimes when we're using a construct chain like that, the absolute in the construct chain refers to a quality of the thing that is expressed by the construct. Okay. Okay. So a man of worth in Hebrew would be Ish Ha'il. Okay. A man of worth. Well, the worth is an attribute of the man. Okay, so the absolute, the genitive, is an attribute of the construct, the one that comes in front. Okay? Specification, this is the reverse of the attributive. The genitive is characterized by a quality of the construct, and the quality of the construct is usually an adjective. So we can say stiff of neck. Okay, stiff is the construct, neck is the absolute, which is the genitive. Okay, but it's the opposite way round from the attributive. It means the neck is stiff. The construct is telling us the characteristic, and the absolute is telling us the item that has that characteristic. Okay. So in the attributive, the absolute tells us the characteristic and the construct tells us the item. In the specification use of the genitive, the construct is telling us the characteristic and the absolute is telling us the item. Okay? So stiff-necked. Okay. Cause, a genitive of cause, means the genitive may be caused by the construct. The spirit of wisdom, the wisdom is caused by the spirit. Okay. Or it may cause whatever is referred to in the construct. So we can say sick of love would mean sickness caused by love. Okay. So either way, sometimes the genitive is caused by the construct, sometimes it causes what is in the construct, but both of those are causal. Then we have a genitive of purpose or result. This means the genitive indicates the intended use of whatever is described in the construct. Okay. Sheep of slaughter, a construct chain with sheep as the construct and slaughter as the absolute, means sheep intended for slaughter. The purpose for that thing is the absolute. The construct is an item, and the absolute tells us the purpose for that item. Okay. And included in this is the idea that there may be the result as well, the result of an action that's implied in the construct. A common phrase that you'll be aware of from Isaiah 53, the chastisement of our peace. Chastisement is a verbal idea. It's the construct, and the absolute or the genitive is of peace. Okay? It means the chastisement that resulted in our peace. Okay, so either purpose or result in those kind of constructions. Oh, there's one missing from this list. Let me put it in. So the next use of the genitive is means. The genitive is the instrument by which the action implied in the construct is performed. Okay. So, for example, wounded is an action, of the sword is the means. Wounded by the sword, we would say. If the genitive is personal, then this becomes a genitive of agency. We could say stricken by God. Okay, so means or agency, the means by which something happens or the agent by which it happens. Okay, so wounded by the sword is a construct chain with wounded in the construct and sword in the absolute. Stricken by God is a construct chain with stricken in the construct and God in the absolute. Okay. Then material, the genitive becomes the material from which the construct is made. Now this is quite a simple one, and it's one you would normally translate anyway if you just saw the words rod of iron. Rod of iron. The rod is the construct, the iron is the absolute, and it's just telling us the material the thing is made of. Okay. And then also measure is a similar kind of thing. The genitive identifies the thing measured by the numerical construct. So we can say 2 sons. Shnei banim. 2 sons. Okay. And we would use a construct chain for that. Shnei in the construct, banim in the genitive, in the absolute. Okay. And in the last, oh hello, no, there's one more down here. Explicative. The genitive tells us a specific member of a general group that is categorized by the construct. So, if we say Eretz Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt, the general group is the construct, land, and the genitive, the absolute, tells us which land, the specific land, the land of Egypt, or Eretz Israel for that matter. Okay, so it's used to make something, identify one out of a category. Okay, so the land is the category, Egypt is the one that is identified out of that category. Okay, and then the final one is a superlative, and if the genitive is a group of objects, so the absolute in a construct chain is a group of objects, then the construct denotes the best of these objects. And this is a very common Hebrew expression. We know of it in Song of Songs, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. It means the best song, the greatest king, the Lord of all. You know, it means a superlative, but it's a very common expression in Hebrew, and normally it's translated literally, but that doesn't give the real idea of what that superlative is saying. We say Song of Songs, and we just kind of think, oh, well, you know, it's a song among songs, but actually it means the best song. When we say King of Kings and Lord of Lords, we are pretty sure we know that means he's king above every king and he's lord over every lord. But what it's really saying is that he's the best out of a group. Okay, and that is that superlative use of a construct chain is very, very common in Hebrew. Most often simply translated literally, but it doesn't really give us the recognition that that's actually a superlative. It means the best one. Okay. So that's a lot of information about the genitive, so let me just pause. Questions? Comments?
Yeah, it's very confused. Because for example, the religious sociology and sociology of religion, there's some difference, right? Religious sociology and the sociology of religion.
Yes, and that's the difference really between the subjective genitive and the objective genitive, I think. Okay, so when we look at these, we have to decide, when we come to a construct chain, basically we have to decide what use of the genitive is this? Is it possessive or is it relationship? Is it subjective or is it objective? Is it attributive or is it specification? Because these two things are kind of opposite. Is it cause or result? Okay, so whenever we come to a construct chain, this is the kind of process that we have to go through. Which of these is it actually referring to? And there's no difference in form between these things. It's really the context that tells us which of these kind of genitives is happening. So the form will always be the same. It's a construct chain. Sometimes it's definite, sometimes it's indefinite, but it's always the same actual form, and we have to decide what function does it have. That's what the grammar is telling us. What function does it have? So what kind of genitive is it in a certain situation? Okay. In Jonah, we've already met one of these. In where is it? I'm speaking from the English now, but here we go. In English, it's just translated the captain. Okay, but in the Hebrew, it is Rav Hamale, is it? 4. Verse 6. Yeah. Rav HaChobel. It's a construct chain. Rav HaChobel. Chobel is the genitive, Rav is the construct. Okay, so I want to know what kind of construct is this? Okay. When you look at all those possibilities, which one do you think it would be? Well, is it possessive? Does the absolute HaChobel, is it owned by the construct Rav? Or is it relational? Does it tell us there's a relationship between HaChobel and Rav? Let me make it easy for you. I think this is the genitive of specification. Okay. Sorry, no, that's not what I mean. It's an explicative genitive. The genitive is a specific member of a general group that is characterized by, no, that's the wrong way around, sorry. It is, it's probably subjective. Okay, the genitive is the subject of a verbal notion expressed by a construct. The construct is Rav. It's a verbal idea which means many or much or great. Okay, so the great one of the sailors is really what it's saying. The captain. Okay, we translate it, but it's a genitive of subject. The verbal idea is the greatness expressed by the construct, and it's a greatness among the group who are sailors. Okay, so it's a subjective genitive. The possessive is usually pretty easy to identify. We just realize what it's saying. It's belonging to somebody. Okay. The relationship one is also pretty obvious because it uses relationship terms like b'nai or av or brother or sister, or so it's a relational one is quite easy to identify. Subjective, you have to recognize that the construct is a verbal idea, and the absolute, which is the genitive, is the subject of that verbal idea. Okay. The objective is the other way round. The genitive, which is the absolute, is the object of the verbal idea that's in the construct. So I gave you two examples. One is subjective, the salvation of Yahweh. The other one is objective, the fear of Yahweh, because it's not Yahweh who fears, it's people who fear Yahweh. Okay? And the first one, the salvation of Yahweh, the salvation is something Yahweh does. It's a verbal idea, and it's something that He does. So that's subjective. The objective one is where it's a verbal idea, but the construct, absolute is the object of that verbal idea. So the fear of Yahweh is something other people do to Yahweh. Okay, so you see the difference between those two? Okay. And then attributive and specification are kind of opposite of each other as well. In attributive, the absolute, which we call the genitive, refers to a quality or attribute of the construct. So we have a man of worth, the mountain of His holiness. Okay, the idea is that the construct states an object, and the absolute gives us a characteristic of that object. With specification, it's the reverse. The construct is a quality, and the absolute in this case is the quality, and the construct is usually some kind of adjective. It's not a verbal idea, it's an adjective. So, stiff-necked, stiff of neck. Stiff is an adjective. The absolute is the noun, neck, and it's describing a quality of that neck. It's stiff. Okay. So those two, the attributive and the specification one, are kind of opposite of each other. Then we have cause and purpose or result. It's kind of like cause and effect, actually. These are kind of opposite of each other, not entirely, but the absolute may be caused by the construct. So we can say sick of love, meaning sickness is the construct, caused by love is the absolute. Okay? Whereas the purpose or result one tells us the purpose for which something is used. So sheep for slaughter. Sheep of slaughter would be the construct chain literally, but it means the sheep are intended for slaughter. Okay. Or a result. Okay, so the chastisement for our peace. Chastisement is the construct, our peace is the absolute, and the thing is He was chastised with the result that we receive peace. Okay, so it can be either a purpose or a result for which something happens. Okay. The means, those ones are usually fairly easy to translate to because we recognize them. Is a verbal idea in the construct followed by an absolute. So wounded by the sword, wounded of sword. Be wounded by the sword. If the absolute in such a case is a person, then it's a genitive of agency, means or agency. Wounded by the sword is a means, because the sword is an object, but stricken by God is agency because God is a person. Okay? But both would be constructed in the same way, with stricken as the construct, and in the first case the sword is the absolute, in the second case God is the absolute. Okay? The material one is pretty easy to identify because it just tells us what the material of something's made out of. So a house of straw or a rod of iron or a piece of wood, or those are usually quite easy to translate. We just know that they're describing the material that something is made of. And the numerical ones are also easy because they're just numbers of measure. So 2 sons, 5 dogs, 10 oxen, that's a genitive of measure. 10 of something. Okay. The explicative just tells us a specific member of a group. Okay. So the land of Israel, the land of Egypt. The group is the land, and then the name of the land is the specific, tells us the specific. And finally, what I said about the superlative, meaning the best of something. Okay, so when we look at a construct chain like this, we need to go, first of all, this is a genitive. What kind of genitive is it? And there are a lot of possibilities. And some of them overlap a little. Okay. For example, if we say servant of God, well, it's kind of possessive. It means a servant belonging to God, but it's also kind of relational, because it means there is a relationship between this person and God somehow. Okay. So there may be some overlapping for some of them. Okay, but so up until now you've just looked at a construct chain and translated it literally and then been able to make some sense out of it one way or the other. But now this gives you a structure for which to decide what kind of genitive is this actually. Okay, and then it'll give you a better idea of how to translate in a specific context. Okay? Does that help? Now, you're not going to remember all of these, but it's helpful to have a list that when I finish this document, I've got a Word document as well. It's got more detail in than the PowerPoint. When I finish the document, I'll post it for you so that then you'll have a list and you can go, oh, this is that kind of genitive, or this is that kind of genitive. This is a very simple. This is a very simplified grammar, much simpler than Watkin O'Connor, but it has the same kind of information in it. And then I've summarised this down so that my list is much simpler. Okay, and so instead of kind of going all through Watkin O'Connor and going, what is this, you can kind of go, oh, there's these kinds of genitives, and the one I'm looking at is most likely this one, and will help you translate.
Can I see this book?
No, not right now. Okay, and I'm warning you that when you read the book, you won't find it as simple as my notes. I've simplified it right down to, there's some things I've quoted directly, but other things I've just kind of cut right down so that you only get the bare minimum, but enough to help you with translating. Okay? And it avoids the complications of things like Muraoka and Watkin O'Connor, because they start off with a whole history of the background of how Hebrew nouns developed from the other Semitic languages and how the cognate languages relate to them, and a whole lot of information that is interesting, but you don't really need to know it. Okay. So in this case, I hesitate to say dumbed it down, but I've actually made it as simple as possible to try and give you the idea that it's just simple categories. Hebrew grammar is not really very complicated. And if you don't know all the different types of genitives, you're still going to be able to quite adequately translate. And the context will give you the general idea. But having a kind of label to hang it on helps a little bit. Okay. I was having a discussion with Adrian Rosen the other day, and he was talking about how there's so much more grammar that you need to know, even from Greek 4, to do, you know, a dissertation in New Testament. And I said to him, well, actually, I did my dissertation from Hebrew 3. I never did Hebrew 4 in my MDiv. I did Greek 4 in my MDiv, but I didn't do Hebrew 4. But I had to translate the whole book of Esther for my dissertation, and I did it from Hebrew 3. So what you've learned up until now in Hebrew 3 is adequate. But having these categories to give you a clear understanding, especially with the genitive, because the genitives, you know, construct change is so common in Hebrew, and they have a lot of different uses. To have, you know, a list that kind of tells you, oh, okay, that's the best way to translate. Well, this really means that, you know, it's just helpful. Okay. Now, if English is your first language, then you probably would do these things automatically without thinking about it. But because English is not your first language, it helps to have a grammatical construct that tells you this is what that thing means. Okay? So the third way that a noun can be used is accusative, which is simply the object of a sentence. Okay? The accusative in Hebrew is often, but not always, identified by the definite direct object marker. And the reason why it's not always is partly because the object may not be definite, and if it's not definite, it won't have a definite direct object marker. But the other thing is that every now and then, it's just missed out for some reason, or for no reason. You know, sometimes a writer just, I don't know, maybe they couldn't be bothered writing it. You know, it's because it doesn't have specific meaning. It's not a word that you translate. It's just a word that tells you that's the object. Sometimes it's just not there. Sometimes the object, the accusative is indicated by an object suffix. So the object of a verb may not be a noun, it might just be the pronominal suffix on the verb. Okay. So the most common uses of the accusative are just as a simple object. Simplest form of the accusative is the direct object of a transitive verb. Okay. But there are some changes depending on the nature of the verb that is used. Okay. So the object can be what we call affected. This means the object exists before and apart from the action of the verb. And then it's impacted by the action. Okay. So for example, and God saw the light. Okay. The light existed before the action of the verb, okay, and apart from the action of the verb. So that's affected. The subject that's affected by the action existed before the action happened, or was separate from that action. Effected means the object did not exist prior to the verbal action, but it is brought about by the action. So, for example, let us make bricks. Okay, bricks is an effected object. It's affected by the action of the verb. Okay. It's quite rare, this kind of term is quite rare, except when the object has the same root as the verb. So, and we've come across this several times in Jonah. They vowed vows. Okay, they sacrificed sacrifices. That's quite a common expression, where the verb and the noun, that's the object, have the same root. Okay, but the the object we're talking about here, the affected object, is usually quite concrete and it's external to the verbal action. Okay. So in this one, what she said, let us make bricks. The bricks are concrete, there's something physical, and there's no connection between let us make and bricks in terms of the root idea. Okay, so we can make any number of things. Let us make pancakes. Let us make, it can be, the making isn't connected verbally with the object. Okay. Then there's such a thing as an internal object. The internal object is usually an abstract noun. And in most cases it's connected with a verb form of the same root. Okay. And so one of them I mentioned already, they vowed vows. This is an abstract idea, it's not something physical they did. Okay. And the two words are connected verbally, they have the same root. Okay. And then finally, we can have a double accusative in the PL and the HIFIL stems, and some other verbs. They sometimes have more than one object. So we could say, he caused me to eat the scroll. Cause to eat is the verb, that's in the HIFIL. But I am the object of that first of all. He caused me to eat. But then there's a second object, to eat the scroll. Okay, so we can have a double accusative, especially if the verb is causative. Okay, and it's usually required by verbs that are for making, forming, naming, or counting. Okay, even if they're not accusatives. The Lord God formed man from the dust. Two objects there. Okay. So, but in PL and HIFIL, which are causative stems, most often they require two objects. And sometimes occasionally when the verb is not causative. Okay. Then the accusative can have an adverbial function. Okay. Rather than indicating the personal thing that's directly affected by the verb, adverbial accusatives relate to the circumstances under which an action or situation occurs. So we can have adverbial of place or of time or of manner, specification, material, product. Okay? The adverbial accusative of place signifies location with verbs of motion or dwelling. Go out into the field. It's an accusative of place. You've been told to go out, the action is go out, and the accusative tells you where. Now, sometimes the noun, of course, will have a locative hey on it, like Tashisha. He went to go to Tarshish. Okay? But if you notice in Jonah, twice in chapter 1, it has the locative hey on it, Tashisha, and then in one place it doesn't. It just says Tarshish. But it's still an adverbial use of the accusative, adverbial of place. Okay. Then we have a time adverbial use. The accusative indicates the time or duration of an action. I came today. Okay. We would say Hayon. This day or today. I came. Okay. And it doesn't necessarily tell us where I came to. I mean, I just arrived. I came, but the adverbial accusative tells us the time at which I came. Okay. The same kind of way applies to the adverbial accusative of manner. It's usually an indefinite noun describing the way in which an action or situation is performed. Okay, so one example of this is, and Israel will dwell in safety. Okay, the word safety is a noun. Okay, we could say, in English we might say, and Israel will dwell securely, which makes it an adverb. In English the ly ending is usually an adverb. Okay, so the noun is indefinite. It doesn't have the definite article on it. It's indefinite, but it's describing the way in which the people dwell. So rather than being a direct accusative, it's what we call, it's like adverbial. It adds to the verb. It gives us some more information about the idea that's in the verb. They're dwelling is the verb, but they're dwelling in safety or securely. Okay? An adverbial accusative of specification explains a verbal action that might seem to be ambiguous otherwise. Okay, so we have about King Uzziah, I think it is. He was diseased in his feet. Okay, the general idea is this disease, but we don't know in what way. Okay, and so we have this additional accusative, another noun, an indefinite noun, or in this case it's definite because it's his feet. Okay, that tells us how he is diseased. So it describes it gives us a specific understanding of what the verbal action is. Okay. A material adverbial accusative is again just something that tells us about the construction. What is the matter that is used, or the material that is used in the verbal action? He made 10 stands of bronze. Okay, bronze is a noun. Actually, in this case, it's indefinite, but it's telling us the material that is being used in the action making. Okay, and that material accusative is common with verbs of making, forming, or building, because we want to know what are they making it, forming it, or building it out of. Okay. So the material adverbial accusative is common in that. And then product is kind of the opposite of the material. The accusative applies to the result of the verbal action, and this is also common with verbs for making, preparing, or shaping. And he made his sons judges over Israel. So it's not the material that it's made out of, but it's something they're being made into. Okay? He made his sons judges. The judges is an accusative. It's indefinite, and it's kind of adding to the idea of the verb. What did he actually make his sons to be? Okay. Okay, so those are the three main uses for nouns. They can be nominative, they can be genitive, or they can be accusative. And the thing is, in Hebrew, one of the reasons why it's important to have all these little distinctions is that in Hebrew, they don't have different forms. Now, the genitive we know is always expressed in a construct change. So at least there's that difference in form. That will tell us, well, this is a genitive. Then we have to decide what kind of genitive it is, and all the kinds of genitives has exactly the same form. So it's only the context that will tell us what kind of genitive it is. The accusative, the form sometimes is obvious. If it's a definite object, then it'll have a definite direct object marker. But if it's not definite, then it can look the same as the subject, actually. And we have to decide which noun in the sentence is the subject and which one's the object. Now, normal word order in Hebrew helps us a little, because the normal word order is verb, subject, object. So if we have two nouns after the verb, then the first one should be the subject, the second one should be the object. If the subject comes before the verb, then the object's still obvious because it's the next noun after the verb. And that's the normal, the most common is verb, subject, object. Occasionally we have subject, verb, object. Very rarely, if ever, we have any other kind of arrangement. So the object usually can be identified either by the definite direct object or by its position in the sentence. Okay, and its relationship to the verb. Okay, but what it's doing and how to translate it depends on whether it's the object of the action of the verb or whether it's actually describing the action of the verb in some way, which makes it adverbial instead of just accusative. Okay. Then we have another class of nouns we could just call nouns in apposition. Okay. This is where two nouns are together, one after the other, with no apparent connection with a verb or anything like that. So we can have Ish, Mitzrayim, a man, an Egyptian. Okay, it's an apposition. The second noun is describing the first noun, a man, an Egyptian. Okay, and this is what we call a species noun in apposition. It indicates a subclass to which the lead word belongs. So we know it's a man, and then the second noun tells us it's an Egyptian man. Okay, it identifies a subclass of the general group men. Okay, nouns in apposition can also be attributive. This indicates a quality or an attribute of the verb that is the lead word. So we could say comforting words. Okay, it describes word as a general class. Comforting tells us what kinds of words. It gives us an attribute of those words. We can have nouns in apposition that describe materials. So we could say simply the bronze oxen. We don't have to say the oxen of bronze. We can say the bronze oxen. Two nouns together, but one is describing the material out of which the second one is made. Okay. And the same thing happens with measure, with numbers. When something is measured or weighed, the lead word is a measuring unit, and the word in apposition is the object that is being measured. So, a seah of flour. A seah is a measure, and the flour is the thing being measured. Okay. And then a noun in apposition can also be explicative. It tells us a particular member of a general category. King Solomon. Hamelech Shlomo is not a construct chain because the definite article is on Hamelech. Okay. King, general category, Solomon, the specific person. Okay. There's two ways of saying King Solomon in Hebrew. You can say Shlomo Hamelech, Solomon the king, or you can say Hamelech Shlomo, King Solomon. Okay, and both of them mean the same thing, King Solomon. Okay, so explicative is this idea that the noun in apposition is a particular member of a general category. So the general category is king. In apposition we have Solomon, it's a specific member of that group. Okay. So that actually covers all of the all of the complications to do with nouns. So in Hebrew, nouns are actually really quite simple. I mean, I know, we seem to have gone through a whole lot of stuff and it seems quite complicated, but actually the nouns are quite simple. They only have masculine, singular, masculine, feminine, singular and plural forms. Okay. And then they function in these particular ways, either as a nominative, a genitive or an accusative, or perhaps an apposition to one another. Okay. And so really the Hebrew nouns are relatively simple. And if you can get a feel for these particular functions, it will help you with your translation. Okay. You can't tell the function from the form, usually, because the forms don't change very much. Okay. The only one that has a clear, that you know clearly is, the one that is most obvious is the genitive, because it's a construct chain. Okay, and those are obvious. What kind of genitive it is something that you kind of have to work on. But if you come across a construct chain, you know, oh, this is the genitive of some description. Okay. The accusative is the next most obvious, because if it's definite, it'll have a definite direct object marker, so the form will tell you it's an accusative. But that's only if it's definite. If it's not definite, then you don't have that, and you have to have some other way of identifying it. Okay. Questions? Comments? Is this helpful?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. It's a little bit confusing.
I know it's a little bit confusing, but if you can start to get these categories kind of sorted out in your mind, then when you come to your translation, you'll be able to say, oh, that's a genitive, and it's a genitive of material. Oh, okay. It helps you recognize what's happening in a sentence. And, it's probably easier if you have the full set of my notes, because then you can look at them and go, oh, okay. I really simplified this right down just to summarize them. Okay. Actually I can post this now because it's just about the nouns. I've got a whole other section which we will begin today on verbs, and this is kind of a pun in English, because I always say to people, all of the action in Hebrew happens in the verbs. Well, it's kind of a pun because the verbs are action words. Okay? But the thing is, that's the truth, that most of the complications in Hebrew grammar are in the verbs, because of all the different stems and the different conjugation forms in the stems. There's a whole lot of complication there. So we're going to start on it today, but we won't finish it today. We'll have a look next week again at some of this. But what I've looked at today, and I'd write down for you, is the uses of nouns. Any questions?
Actually, it's interesting for us to learn, because by far now, we just know only possessive meaning, but we did not know it comes under genitive or something like that. So
the thing is, when you've translated it, usually the way you translate it is a little bit awkward, because you usually just say something of something, and then you have to think, well, what does it really mean? And this gives you categories to put it under.
yes.
Yeah. It's not always possessive. That's the thing to realise. It's not always possessive. Relationship and possessive kind of overlap a little bit, but there is a difference, because the relationship ones usually have relationship words in them that will help you. But all of these others, it could be. You could make a mistake in translation if you thought it was a subjective when really it was an objective, or if you, so it's good to have these different categories and to be able to realise, oh, hang on, now when I look at this, what does it actually fit in? What category does it fit in for a genitive? And realise that there are different categories, and that will help with the actual meaning of the phrase. Yizhang, you're sitting over there looking a little bemused. Are you okay?
Yeah, because I always take lap after lunch.
Oh, you're feeling like you need a nap?
Yes, not only I know when we are in the child in the primary school, every kid
Okay, so but you're understanding.
Well, it's hard because for Chinese we are very few about the grammar. It's
Yes.
very simple.
Yeah. This is, I mean, these are grammatical categories that, especially if you've studied other languages from a grammatic point of view, you can kind of fit them into the categories that you know from studying Greek or even maybe from English. Although English grammar is not really as well defined as when you learn English. You don't really learn so much grammar, I don't think. Okay, but having this kind of framework can help you realise what is this word doing in this sentence, and we could look in detail at things like adjectives and pronouns and that, but I think the nouns and the verbs are the two really important things. And this much is enough on the nouns. Nouns in Hebrew are not complicated. They're pretty straightforward, and they do fit into certain categories, but they don't have lots of different forms that tell you what category they fit in. You just have to work it out. But if you remember, always a construct chain is a genitive of some sort. Then you can look down your list of genitives and go, I think it's that one. Yeah. Okay. So, I'll put this. I think I can post it on Moodle right now. If it will be. Quick enough. So when you have another look at your translation, when you start to decide what passage you're going to do your translation on, then you can use these categories, have another look at your translation, see, have I translated that the best way it could be translated? Okay, I'll put this here in topic 5. I'm going to put it under. Okay, so it's there now under topic 5. Overview of Hebrew grammar, nouns. And that's got the detail that I've given you, a little more detail in the PowerPoint. Okay. So, are you ready to launch into verbs? Are you ready? Okay. The trouble with Hebrew verbs is they don't really have tense. Now, that causes problems when translating into English because English has very strong different kinds of tenses. And so trying to work out what tense you should put a verb in when the Hebrew doesn't really have a tense it causes the major difficulty. So what the main attribute of Hebrew verbs is what we call aspect. The aspect of a verb identifies the action as either undefined or progressive. But there's a second thing about the verbs, the way that they're classified. The action is classified with regard to several other words that we use. Voice, fientivity, transitivity, causation, and various reflexive actions. Okay, now I'm going to explain some of those words as we go along. The first thing that we want to look at of the verbs is the stem. Okay, and that's why when we parse a verb, after its root, the first thing we put down is the stem. The cowl stem is the simple active stem. It can be what we call fientive. Fientive describes action, motion, or change of state. Or it can be stative, which describes a state or a quality. So this idea of fientive is really the basic idea of a verb. It's an action. Okay, it's an action or a motion or a change of some description. Okay, that's normally what we think of as verbs, but we also have verbs of state. I am full is a verb of state, or I am afraid is a verb of state. It's not a verb of action. Okay, so the fientive describes an action or a motion or a change of some kind of state. The stative describes a quality, state or quality of something. Okay, and that's the cowl stem. It's very simple. It's the one that's used most often, and it's pretty easy to translate. Okay, the nifal is primarily middle passive or reflexive. It can be translated as the simple passive of the cowl. It's always unspecified in Hebrew, which means that the verb is not accompanied by a noun which specifies the agent of the action. For example, the lesson was read. Hebrew won't tell you by whom. Okay? The Hebrew doesn't have a noun that specifies the agent. Okay? It can also function as a reflexive, which means the subject and the object of the verb are the same. For example, I will avenge myself. I am the subject, but I'm also the object. Okay? So this use of the nifal may in fact denote permission. I permitted myself to be sought. Okay? The nifal can also be stative. In this case, this is often equivalent to the simple adjectival state. On the Sabbath day, it shall be opened. Okay? Talk about the gate. Okay? But the verb is, it appears in what in English we would say is the passive. Okay? But it's a state of being open. Okay? Okay, so the nifal, it can just be the passive of the cow. But we always have to remember that it has a reflexive quality. So a nifal can just be simply reflexive, not necessarily expressing a passive. And it can express a state. The PL, on the other hand, is causative, but it's causative active, but it's pretty hard to define into a hard and fast category. Okay, it's frequently used to express an action that brings about a state, so it works in a variety of ways. The PL can be what we call factative. A verb that is intransitive in the cow becomes transitive in the PL. In other words, I will make your name great. Okay, it's intransitive in the cow, but so it doesn't have an object. But in the PL, it becomes transitive. I will make your name great. Okay. It can be denominative, which indicates a verbal idea that is derived from a noun of the same root. For example, the word which he spoke. Davar, yudaber. Okay. It can be frequentative. Many verbs in the PL reflect multiple repeated or busy action. All day long I go around mourning. It happens, it's repeated. Okay, or it could actually be busy. I mean, in mourning, that's not a verb that we could think of as being a busy, but we could say he walked about in front of the temple. He was busy walking about. Okay, and it can be declarative. It's used to indicate some kind of proclamation. The priest will pronounce him unclean. To pronounce unclean is in the PL. Okay, so it's causative active, but it has this whole variety of ways in which it can express the causation. Okay. The puel is causative passive, so in that sense it's the passive counterpart of the PL, and it has the same four functions. Okay, it can be factative. We could say the flax and the barley were ruined. That would use a puel. Can be denominative, and they shall eat them by which atonement is made. To make atonement, in that sense, is in the puel. It can be frequentative. It was burned up, meaning regularly the whole burnt offering was burned up. Okay. And it can be declarative. So they were considered unclean for the priesthood. Just an interesting side note, 40% of all puel forms are participles. So that means the puel participle is the most common of the puel forms. 40% of them are participles. Okay, so that means the other 60% are divided up between finite forms of the verb, justives, coauditives, subjunctives, infinitives, the two types of infinitive. Okay, so yeah, the most common form of the puel is the participle. The hit pael is the causative reflexive stem. It can function as a simple reflexive. For example, they hid themselves. It can be reciprocal. They just look at one another in the face. Or it can be what we call iterative, which means something that's kind of repeated. Noah walked with God. Hit pale. Or it can be denominative. Among the prophets, I saw a disgusting thing. They prophesied by Baal and led my people astray. The denominative means that the subject is of the same root word as the verb. Okay? So in this case it would be Navi'im for prophets and Hit Navi for the Hit Payal form. And then the Hifil, of course, is the causative active stem. It expresses the cause of an action, and it acts in a variety of ways. It can be causative, usually with a double object. Okay. So, for he will cause them to inherit the land. Cause to inherit is the verb. It has these two objects, them and the land. Okay. Or it can be singly transitive. I am Yahweh who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldees. Okay. It doesn't have another object. It's just one object. It can be stative. It denotes the causing of a state, using a root that is also stative in the cow. The example that we give is, you have become presumptuous. It's a state of being. Maybe it isn't. And it can be declarative. For example, they will pardon the righteous. Actually, the word which we translate pardon in Hebrew means declare righteous. So it's a repetition of the noun form, righteous. And they will declare righteous the righteous. Okay, it uses the same root in the declarative statement. And denominative means stating something that is primarily expressed by a noun. And he did not give ear to them. Okay. The verb is from the root ozen, for ear. He did not. We would say listen to them, but the Hebrew term really means, it's a noun term, given ear to them. Okay. And it can be permissive. God allowed me to see your children also. So although it's causative, God has made it possible for me to see your children. God has caused it, but it's really expressing the idea of granting permission. Okay. And then of course the final stem is the Hofal. It's a causative passive stem, and it's the passive counterpart of the Hifil. And it can be causative, stative, or denominative. Causative, anyone who molests this man or his wife shall certainly be put to death. Hofal, be put to death. Okay. Be caused to die, I guess we would say. Stative, I am wounded. It sounds just simple passive. And the denominative, the beasts of the field will be at peace with you. Okay. So now when you learn the different stems, these are the basic things you learned about those stems. Kal is usually simple active or stative. Nifal is passive or reflexive. Actually, it used to be always termed passive, but more modern grammarians have said actually it's more reflexive normally than passive. Okay, sometimes it has to be translated as a passive, but it really has this reflexive idea. Okay, the PL is causative active. The pual is causative passive. Hipale is causative reflexive. Hiphil is causative active. Which means that Hiphil and the PL seem to occupy a similar space. They both seem to be causative active. The PL is used in a variety of ways, much more variety than the Hiphil. Okay, and then the Hophal is the causative, is the passive counterpart of the Hiphil. Okay, so remembering those basic ideas for the different stems should help you with the translation. Okay, but when we come to timing in the verbs, we have to look at aspect. And this is the grammatical category that identifies action as either undefined or progressive. Hebrew conjugations indicated aspect in that they denote the relation of an action to the passage of time, especially in reference to its completion, duration, or repetition. Okay, so while we don't have actual tense in Hebrew, the form of the verb tells us something to do with the verb's action in relation to time. So, when we talk about aspect, we talk about the affix form of the verb, views the situation from the outside, looking on it as a complete whole. Okay, so it's looking at something happening over there and looking at it as having been completed. Okay, in many grammars this is called the perfect. Okay, grammatically that's what it's called, the perfect. We call it affix because of its form, but its function has this idea that it's looking at an action that is complete. The affix may refer to an action or state in the past, present or future. Okay, although it tends to view something it tends to view an action as a complete situation that is temporarily undefined. That should say or, not are. Sorry, it's a little, makes the sentence a little confusing. Complete situation or action that is temporarily undefined. There we go. It is frequently used for actions or states reported in the past, often requiring past tense translations, but it may also refer to an event and a state resulting from that event. Okay, so although we generally always translate an affix as past, I'm talking about the affix without a verb on it. Okay, and we'll talk about what happens when the verbs goes on them separately. But at the moment I'm talking about an affix without the verb. Normally we've just translated the affix without a verb as a past tense. But it doesn't, that's not really all that the affix does. Okay, so we can categorize it in these ways. First of all, complete. The action or state, that should say or not of as well. You can see I was typing this in a hurry. The action or state is viewed as a complete whole with the beginning and end in view. So translation usually requires either a simple past, what we would call a present perfect, or even what we would call a pluperfect tense. Now, these tenses, the reason why we use these terms are because these are the tenses in English, and English has very complicated tenses. Okay? So, for example, a simple past, and the darkness he called night, past tense, happened in the past, complete, finished. Okay? Okay. A present perfect, God has forgotten. The present state is the forgottenness of the sins, okay? It's a present state, but it's something that God did in the past. He has forgotten. Okay, and it's ongoing. And then Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen. That's what we call a pluperfect. In the past time, Jacob was in the state of not knowing something that Rachel had done before. That was complete before this state. So these are all expressed by affix. Okay, and the context tells us which of these kind of expressions is the best one to use in a certain place. So the action or the state is viewed as a complete whole. Stative, the stative use of the affix is referring to a state of affairs or a condition that's usually expressed through a stative verb. Okay? This usually requires present tense translation. Okay? Your hands are full of blood. It's present tense, it's now. It's a state that's viewed as a complete whole, okay, or a condition, and you have to translate it with the present. I am afraid would be an affix form of the verb. Not I was afraid, but it's a state that I'm in now. Okay. There could be the idea of experience with a fenta verb, an active verb that denotes a state of mind, usually requiring a present in translation. I do not know. Now in Hebrew you can't say I do not know. I mean, unless we understand that the affix can be translated as a present. Normally, if it's affix form and it says lo yadati, we would think I did not know. But if it's an experience, then it requires a present tense translation. If I say lo yadati, I'm not saying I didn't know, I'm saying I don't know. Now, I'm in the state of not knowing. Okay? This is common with verbs of perception or attitude. So know, think, feel, those kind of verbs of attitude. Something, an action that's a state of mind requires a translation in the present tense. The rhetorical future. This expresses a vivid future action or situation which is not yet a reality but is considered a certainty from the speaker's rhetorical viewpoint. This was often called in older grammars, it was called the prophetic perfect. It's used a lot by the prophets to state situations that are future but are so certain that to the speaker it's like they're past already. Okay? So, therefore my people will go into exile for want of knowledge. The prophet is saying, this hasn't happened yet, but it's so certain that it is going to happen. Okay? And that's an affix form, but it's translated as a future. Okay, and the reason it's an affix form is because even though it hasn't happened yet, it's so certain that it's going to happen that we can treat it as complete. Okay. Okay, and in the older grammar books, this is called the prophetic perfect. The proverbial use of the affix, it denotes actions or events or facts that are not time conditions and considered to be general truths. the grass withers and the flower fades. Okay, those are affix forms, but translated as kind of present. Okay, and as general things that happen. And then the final is performative. This describes an action that occurs by means of speaking, usually requiring a present tense translation. I appoint you over all Egypt. The speaking actually becomes the action. I appoint you. And the result of that speech is that he's appointed. You know, so it really requires a present tense translation, even though it would be an affix form. Okay, so when you come across affix forms without the verb, just an ordinary affix form without the verb, then you need to be aware that there's a variety of, there's not always just a past tense translation. You can look at it and think, okay, is the action complete? Is it a simple past that I can just, you know, translate it simply as a past? Or is there some kind of addition that I need to make to the past translation? So the first one we could say, God called darkness light. He did that, night, sorry. He did that in the past, and it was done. Okay. But God has forgotten is something that happened in the past, but it hasn't changed since then. It's still ongoing. Okay. And then the last one, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Jacob's in the past from us, and then Rachel is in the past from Jacob's position. She before now she did this, and he didn't know about it. Okay, so it's a kind of double past, if you want to think of it like that. Okay. When it's a stative verb, quite often it has to be translated as a present tense. And if it's an active verb that's talking about a state of mind, then it probably needs a present tense translation as well. And then we have that whole idea of the prophetic picture, that something that's still future but is so certain that the speaker or writer can talk about it as past, is an affix form, and we have to translate it as a future. Okay, so the form of the verb doesn't necessarily mean I'm always going to translate it as a past tense. Okay, you have to be aware that there are, and the context is what tells us, you know, which of these translations is the best, and you know, and the real problem we have is that Hebrew does not have tense.
Like Chinese, we don't have tense.
And that's why when you speak in English you have trouble with tenses.
Right.
Yeah, because English has all these different tenses, all these, you know, kind of nuances of tense. And so the affix can be, basically it can be translated in 5 or 6 different ways. We can translate it as a simple past, we can translate it as a kind of continuing past, we can translate it as a past, or we can translate it as a present, or we can translate it as a future. So when you come to an affix form, you can't just automatically go, oh, past tense, and translate it that way. You have to decide, what is it doing here in the sentence? What does the context tell me? Would I use it as a present tense translation of that acceptable, or isn't even a future tense acceptable? Okay. Alright, I think we can do the prefix and then we'll stop. The prefix has an even less precise time value than the affix does. In many grammar books, and certainly the older ones, it's called the imperfect, and sometimes it's still called imperfect. In general, the prefix views actions, events or states from the inside. Remember we said the affix reviews them from the outside as though they're complete? The prefix views them from the inside, meaning that the situation described by a prefix verb is underway or in process. It's still continuing. The speaker or the writer views the situation as still continuing. Okay? It's in the process of accomplishment. It's just taking place, or it's about to take place. It's so close that it's almost happening already. Okay? So the context must determine whether the situation is past, present or future. In the same way that we had to make that determination with the affix, we have to make it with the prefix as well. That should be is, not if, sorry. Is, yeah. So, here's the ways that the prefix can be categorized. I made the PowerPoint much, I put all the detail in here because the verbs are just so complicated. You need all of this information. You can use the prefix as a simple future. It describes an action that's anticipated or announced. For example, for a king will reign over us. Just a simple future. It can be used to denote action that is actually in the past, but it's before some other action. Okay, so, and he brought to the man to see what he would call him. It happened in the past, but God brought it. The he would call them is the prefix form. Okay, God brought something to the man, and then the man's action is future.
Okay.
To that action. Okay?
Because of
Yeah, so when God brought him, the action of the man in calling them is still future, so the prefix form is used. Okay? It can also denote action in the future that is prior to another anticipated action. It says, and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the sacred pole that you shall cut down. Okay? So God is saying to the person, you're going to cut down this pole, and then after you've cut it down, you're going to use it to make the fire for the burnt offering. So making the fire for the burnt offering is going to come after the cutting down of the pole. Okay, the pole, the cutting down of the pole is an action that is immediately prior to another action that you're going to do. Okay, so the cutting down of the pole is expressed in the prefix, and it comes just before the use of the pole to make the fire. Okay. It can also be used as customary. It speaks about an action that occurs regularly or customarily. This is what Job would always do. Okay. It's in Elijah in the passage where he goes to the brook Cherith and he would drink from the water day and night, and the ravens would bring him food. It's prefix form there, but it's not. We can't translate it as future because this is something that happened in ancient Israel, but it's something he did regularly. Okay. The prefix can also be progressive. It indicates an action that is underway or continuing as the writer describes it. Just the simple question, where are you going? It's happening now, and I'm asking you the question now. It's underway, it's continuing, it's not complete yet, so it's prefix form. If we think about the general categories that affix is complete action and prefix is incomplete action, that kind of helps, but it doesn't always help. But in this case, because you are going is underway and it's continuing, it hasn't finished yet, it's a prefix form. Okay. It also expresses contingency. It expresses an action that is dependent upon other factors in the context, and there's a wide variety of uses of this kind that often require the use of helping verbs like may, can, still, might, could, should, and so on. So there are different kinds of contingency. One is conditional. It expresses that action of the introductory clause of a conditional sentence. Expresses the action, sorry. For example, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous people, okay, it's prefix form, prefix with a key, if, but if I find in Sodom 50 righteous people, it's a conditional clause, okay. It also can indicate permission. The subject is permitted to take action. It usually requires a may. You may freely eat of every tree in the garden. Prefix form. Okay. It can denote obligation, that some action should or should not be done. Such a thing is not done in Israel. Prefix form. Okay. And it can express a command, a strong injunction to do something, or a strong prohibition. You shall make rooms for the ark. Or any of the 10 commandments. You shall not. Okay. Prefix form. And then there's this preterite form which designates specifically past time situations when occurring after these prepositions. As, terem, or beterem. Okay. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. Prefix form. It's saying after that happened, then they sang. So it's incomplete action, and we could think of it as future, except that it all happened in the past. You know. So then this happened, and then after that was the next thing that happened is in the prefix. Okay. So with those prepositions, all of which mean either then or before or yeah. Okay. Okay, so again the prefix isn't necessarily always translated with a future tense. Sometimes it has to be translated with a past tense or with what we would call a habitual tense, like the would. Okay. Sometimes it's granting permission, sometimes it's stating a condition. Okay, so we have to, when we see a prefix form again, we have to look at it from the context and go, okay, what is it doing here? So what is the best way to translate it? What is its function? Okay. Okay. Now, the PowerPoint is much fuller on this, and I've got a whole set of notes on the verbs, which haven't finished yet because there's so much in the verbs. But eventually, I will post both of these in Moodle so that you have them, and know that in some cases I'm quoting directly. I'm not plagiarising because I said I was summarising it. Some places I'm quoting directly, other places I'm just smoothing out the English so it's easier for you to understand, and just giving you a general, very condensed version of what is in here, which is also a condensed version of what is in Block Henochona, really. Okay, but it just helps you to get the main points of Hebrew grammar that will help you as you begin to translate.